The afternoon light was fading when Elliot Graves stood before the narrow seam in the peeling wallpaper line, so subtle that only the keen eye of a seasoned project manager could have noticed it. The crew had paused their demolition work, their tools resting silently against the dust-covered floorboards. A low murmur of anticipation rippled among them. Elliot traced the edge with a gloved hand, fingers trembling slightly despite his usual composure. "This wall isn't just damaged," he said, voice low. "There's something behind it." Jared Morales grunted, setting down his hammer. "Another secret room. After the first one, I'm not sure I want to find more ghosts." Maya Chen stepped forward, adjusting her glasses as she shone her flashlight along the wall's surface. "If there is, it could tell us more about this place, about the children who lived here." Together, the crew began carefully prying away the crumbling plaster. The air was thick with dust and the faintest scent of mildew, but beneath it lay something colder, heavier. As the final panel was removed, a narrow doorway emerged, its edges rough and splintered. Beyond, darkness swallowed the beam of their flashlights. Elliot took a deep breath, the weight of what lay ahead settling on his shoulders. He led the way inside. The room was small and claustrophobic, its walls scarred with deep, uneven scratches, like desperate attempts to claw a way out. Faded drawings of stick figures and childish scribbles, yellowed with age and torn at the edges, were pinned haphazardly to the cracked plaster. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the soft scrape of footsteps and the distant creak of the old building settling. Maya moved carefully, her eyes scanning every corner. "This wasn't just a storage space," she whispered. "It looks like a punishment room. Or worse." She knelt by a shattered wooden crate, uncovering a tattered journal. Opening it, she read aloud, in a voice barely above a whisper, "They say, I'm bad. I'm locked in here so I can't hurt anyone else. The nights are cold and my hands bleed from the bars. I just want my mama." The words hung in the stale air, heavy with sorrow and despair. Elliot's jaw tightened as memory stirred flashbacks of his own childhood. The loss of a sibling whose face had haunted his dreams for decades. The parallels between the journal's author and his own past were undeniable, the building's darkness mirroring his internal scars. Tommy Briggs shifted uneasily at the doorway, eyes wide. "I don't like this. It feels like the walls are watching us." Jared exchanged a look with Elliot, a flicker of doubt crossing his usually stoic features. "Maybe some things should stay buried," he muttered. But Elliot shook his head, the old leather jacket creaking as he moved closer to Maya. "No," he said firmly. "We have to know. For them, for us." The room seemed to breathe around them, whispers threading through the silence, like fragile threads of ghostly voices. Shadows danced at the edges of their vision, fleeting glimpses of small, broken figures trapped in a liminal space between past and present. As Maya pieced together the fragments of the children's stories, Elliot felt the weight of his own hidden grief pressing to the surface. The haunting was no longer just about the building, it was about the pain carried in every heart present, invisible yet palpable. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling loose panes and sending a chill through the boarded windows. The crew gathered their tools, the room's oppressive sorrow lingering in their bones. Elliot paused by the doorway, hand resting against the cold wood. "We can't run from this," he said quietly. "We have to face it." And in that moment, the walls seemed to pulse faintly, as if in acknowledgement, unspoken pact forged in the shadowed depths beneath the surface. But the journey was only beginning. The past was waking, and the price of remembrance was yet to be paid. The air in the abandoned boarding school had shifted. What had started as subtle whispers faint brushings of cold air, and unexplained creaks had erupted into something far more sinister. The walls themselves seemed to bleed now. Thick, dark rivulets seeped from the cracked plaster, pooling sluggishly on the floorboards below. The crimson liquid was impossibly vivid against the dull, peeling paint, a grotesque parody of life leaking from the very bones of the building. Elliot Graves stood frozen, his breath catching as he watched the transformation unfold. Around him, the crew's unease had blossomed into outright panic. Maya Chen's eyes widened behind her glasses, her usual composed demeanor unraveling as the historian tried to reconcile the physical horror with historical accounts she had pored over just days ago. Jared Morales, usually the rock of skepticism and practicality, stumbled backward, fists clenched, his face pale beneath the tattoos that traced his arms. Tommy Briggs whimpered softly, clutching at Elliot's jacket as if seeking protection from the unseen. The shadows along the hallway walls began to twist and writhe, no longer passive darkness, but active, malevolent shapes. They contorted into vaguely childlike figures, but their faces were grotesque mouths stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged tooth-like shapes that gleamed in the dim light. These spectral children swirled around the crew, whispering unintelligible words that morphed into anguished screams, echoing through the decaying corridors. "Everyone, stay close." Elliot's voice rang out, shaky but commanding as he pulled his battered leather jacket tighter around him. His journal, which he had kept religiously since the first unsettling signs, was tucked under one armor talisman against the madness. Claire Dunham's skepticism faltered as she backed toward the far wall, eyes darting between the bleeding plaster and the shifting shadows. "This can't be real," she muttered, but even she was trembling. The crew moved as one toward the exit, adrenaline surging through their veins, but the building had other plans. Doors that had stood wide open mere moments ago now slammed shut with a thunderous finality. Metal locks clicked into place, sealing them inside. The air thickened, heavy with a suffocating presence that pressed in on their chests and made every breath a struggle. Maya's voice was barely a whisper. "It's like the building itself is alive and angry." Jared banged on a sealed door, his knuckles bleeding, a guttural curse escaping him. "We need to get out now." Elliot's eyes flicked to the journal in his hand, then back to the writhing shadows. He could feel the weight of every child who had ever suffered here, their pain, their fear, their endless waiting. It was the collective presence, the embodiment of all the lost innocence and trauma, demanding to be remembered. "Listen to me," Elliot barked, stepping into the center of the group, trying to steady the shaking in his voice. "We can't run. This place wants us trapped here, feeding on our fear. We have to face it to understand it if we want any chance of getting out." Tommy nodded, eyes wide but resolute. "I'm with you." Maya adjusted her glasses, determination hardening in her gaze. The stories, the histories, they're all connected. This isn't just a haunting, it's a manifestation of the pain buried here. As if answering her words, the shadows coalesced. The darkness deepened, flickering lights casting grotesque shapes that slowly formed a towering, amorphous figure. Its body shimmered in and out of focus, constantly shifting between blurred faces of children and rows of jagged teeth, like protrusions embedded in the walls themselves. The presence pulsed with sorrow and rage, a silent demand echoing in the depths of their minds. "Remember us. Acknowledge our suffering." Elliot swallowed hard, feeling his own buried fears rising to the surface. Childhood memories he had long tried to bury clawed at his consciousness, mingling with the spectral pain surrounding them. The battle ahead was no longer just about survival. What about facing the darkness within and without? We stand together, Elliot declared, raising his voice over the cacophony of screams and shifting walls. We remember, we face this. The walls continued to bleed, the shadows to twist, and the night to deepen. But in that moment, amidst the terror, a fragile thread of hope threaded through the darkness, a chance to break the cycle of pain and find a way out of the nightmare. And as the presence loomed, waiting for their next move, the whispers turned to screams. The corridor was a narrowing tunnel of shadows. The faint light from Elliot's flashlight dancing unevenly on the cracked plaster walls. Every breath he took seemed to echo not just in the empty space, but deep within his chest, as if the building itself exhaled with him. The air hung heavy, thick with a silence that was anything but empty. It was waiting. The walls around him began to pulse subtly, as if breathing, their surfaces rippling like dark water. Shapes flickered along the edges of his vision, childlike figures, translucent and trembling. Their faces blurred, but their wide eyes and small, sharp teeth unmistakably present in the shifting shadows. Elliot's heart hammered against his ribs, a fierce drumbeat of fear and resolve. He swallowed hard, gripping the worn leather jacket tighter around him, and stepped forward. "I'm here," he said quietly, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I'm listening." From the depths of the corridor, a chorus of whispers arose, layered and overlapping, voices folding into one another like threads weaving a sorrowful tapestry. They called out names Elliot recognized from Maya's research, children who had vanished, who had suffered, who had been forgotten. The voices rose and fell in a haunting cadence, a lament that chilled the skin and stirred the soul. "Remember us," the voices pleaded, some clear as a single breath, others distorted by the passage of time. "See us, hear us." Elliot closed his eyes, the sounds wrapping around him like a spectral embrace. He felt the weight of their pain, a collective anguish that transcended time, binding the children to this place like roots to soil. His own memories surged unbidden, his lost siblings' face, the silence of abandonment, the guilt that had shadowed him for decades. This was no malevolent force seeking to harm. It was a fragment of history, an embodiment of all the neglect and sorrow endured here. Suddenly, a voice broke through the hazemares, faint but resolute. "Elliot, we're here." Jared's gruff reply followed, "Hold on, man, we're coming to you." The walls seemed to shift, the air thickening, reality bending as the building itself resisted their presence. Elliot opened his eyes to see them emerging from the shadows Maya's determined gaze. Jared's tense stance anchors in the swirling chaos. Their shared fear was palpable, but so was their determination. "This isn't just a haunting," Elliot whispered to the voices. "Your memories, pain, innocence lost. I see you, I hear you." The shadows recoiled and advanced in a rhythm, a dance of teeth-like patterns emerging from the walls, morphing into faint smiles and anguished expressions. The entity pulsed with sorrow, its voice now a fragile whisper. "Remember, or we remain." Elliot's breath hitched. "I promise, we will remember." As if in response, the oppressive weight lifted slightly. The walls steadied, the air cleared, and the childlike apparitions shimmered, their forms softening into peaceful glimmers before fading into the darkness. But the reprieve was fragile. Elliot knew this night was but a single battle in a longer war between memory and oblivion. He turned to Maya and Jared, their faces etched with exhaustion and relief. "We have a chance," he said, voice hoarse but firm. "But this place, it's not done with us. Not yet." Outside, the wind howled softly through broken windows, carrying with it the faintest echo of a child's laughter. The teeth in the walls had shown their faces, and they demanded to be remembered. The story was far from over. The confrontation with the collective presence marked a turning point for Elliot. He had come into the building as a pragmatic project manager, skeptical of ghost stories and haunted histories. But now, standing amid the shifting walls and whispered voices, he understood the depth of what they faced. The entity was no mere spectre. It was the embodiment of centuries of pain, sorrow, and forgotten childhoods. As the night deepened, Elliot struggled to keep his crew together. Maya's knowledge of the school's history became a lifeline, her calm amidst the chaos grounding them. Jared's skepticism faltered, replaced by raw vulnerability as his own demons surfaced in the oppressive atmosphere. Together, they fought not just for survival, but to give voice to the silenced. The building groaned and shifted, corridors elongating and rooms folding in upon themselves. Time fractured, moments stretched and snapped back like broken glass. Elliot's own memories melded with the haunting, a kaleidoscope of past and present. The teeth in the walls were not just physical manifestations, they were symbols of the gnawing guilt, the sharp edges of loss that had bitten into his soul. In the midst of this nightmare, Elliot found clarity. Fear alone would not save them. They needed to understand, to acknowledge the pain that had festered unseen for so long. This realization was both a burden and a beacon. He raised his voice above the cacophony. "We remember you," he declared. "Your stories will not be lost again." For a moment, the building seemed to pulse with life. Shadows swirling into forms of children smiling faintly, their eyes gleaming with a mixture of sadness and relief. Then, as dawn approached, the presence receded, leaving behind a fragile silence. But Elliot knew this fragile peace was temporary. The teeth in the walls would return, fed by the silence of forgetting. And so would the pain. He clutched his journal, the pages heavy with the weight of memory, and stepped toward the light of the breaking day. The story would continue. The children would not be forgotten, not while he still breathed. And deep within the walls, the faintest of whispers lingered, promising that the past was never truly gone. The dawn broke cold and pierced the horizon with a pale, hesitant light as the battered crew stumbled out of the school's front entrance. The heavy wooden doors, scarred and swollen from years of neglect and the recent violent upheavals, groaned as they swung open, releasing the survivors into the brittle morning air. They gasped, each breath a mix of exhaustion and relief, their limbs trembling not just from physical exertion, but from the oppressive weight that had hung in the air inside the crumbling walls. Elliot Graves was the first to cross the threshold, his hands clutching the worn and water-damaged journal that had become his tether to understanding the nightmare they had endured. His weathered face was streaked with dirt and sweat, eyes wide and haunted as they scanned the fading outlines of the building behind them. The school stood silent, its windows like empty sockets, the shadows within still whispering secrets just beyond mortal hearing. Behind him, Maya Chen moved with careful reverence, her fingers tracing the outlines of scattered belongings, faded photographs, broken toys, and fragments of the children's lives unearthed during their frantic escape. Her voice was barely audible as she whispered a vow to preserve the history they had uncovered, to ensure the stories of those lost to neglect and cruelty would not be forgotten. The weight of the past pressed upon her, yet her resolve shone through the sorrow. Jared Morales leaned heavily against a nearby oak, his breath ragged, muscles taut as if bracing for another unseen assault. The shadows behind his eyes flickered with the ghosts of his own demons, the PTSD that had gnawed at him long before the haunting, now intertwined with the spectral horrors that had stalked them all. Sheriff Paula Reed stood nearby, her gaze sharp but her posture betraying the strain of witnessing the aftermath. She knew the ordeal was far from over. The echoes of that dark place would linger long after the physical dangers had passed. Tommy Briggs, the youngest of the crew, looked back once more at the school, his eyes wide and shimmering with a mixture of fear and awe. He had followed Elliot's lead, drawing strength from the project manager's steadiness, even as his own sensitivity to the supernatural had left him vulnerable. Now, outside the walls that had confined them, he struggled to reconcile the nightmare with the fragile hope of survival. As the survivors gathered, the first light of day cast long shadows across the cracked pavement. The silence around them, heavy with unspoken grief. The building behind them was no longer just a structure of brick and mortar. It was a monument to suffering, a vessel of memories that refused to die. The whispered voices that had haunted every corridor and hidden room seemed to pulse faintly through the air, as if reminding those left behind that the story was not finished. Elliot opened his journal, running his fingers over the damp pages filled with frantic notes, sketches, and fragments of overheard whispers. Each entry was a step deeper into the dark history of the boarding school, a map of trauma etched in ink and memory. The final pages held a trembling account of the confrontation with the collective presence, a sorrowful force born from the pain and loss of countless children. It had demanded remembrance, and in their escape, they had granted it at last. Yet, the cost was etched into their souls. Elliot felt the familiar ache of guilt and loss tighten in his chest, the voice of his lost sibling still echoing faintly in his mind. Maya's eyes glistened with tears as she gathered the artifacts, understanding that her mission was only beginning. Jared's taut muscles slowly relaxed, but the specter of his own past remained a shadow at his side. Even Tommy, though young, was marked by the experience, his innocence forever altered. Sheriff Reed approached Elliot quietly, her voice low but firm. "This place, it's not done with us yet. But you all did what few could. You survived." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Survived, yes. But I don't know if we'll ever truly leave it behind. Not while those whispers linger in the walls." Around them, the morning light seemed to falter for a moment, and a faint, almost imperceptible murmur drifted on the breeze. A child's laughter, a soft plea, a wordless sorrow. The survivors exchanged uneasy glances, the fragile peace shattered by the knowledge that the presence within the school was neither fully gone nor fully at rest. They stood together, a fractured family forged by terror and resilience, bound by the secrets they now carried. The boarding school, with its hidden rooms and haunted walls, remained a silent sentinel, a reminder that some memories, some traumas, refuse to be buried. As the sun climbed higher, Elliot closed his journal and looked back one last time. The building loomed, a dark silhouette against the brightening sky, its teeth hidden in the walls, waiting, watching, and whispering still. The journey was over, but the story was far from finished. The survivors dispersed into the waking world, each carrying the heavy knowledge of what lay beneath the surface of the school's crumbling facade. Elliot found himself haunted not only by the spectral presence, but by the unresolved grief that had shaped his life. His journal became a lifeline, a place to pour out memories and fears, a testament to what had been endured and what must be remembered. Maya dedicated herself to cataloging the artifacts and testimonies, determined to bring light to the dark history that had been hidden for so long. Her research blossomed into plans for a public exhibition, a way to honor the children and confront the community with the realities of neglect and abuse. Jared sought help for his PTSD, his experiences at the school intertwining with his past traumas in a complex and painful web. The nightmare had changed him, but it also forced a turning point, a reluctant step toward healing. Tommy, under Elliot's mentorship, began to find his voice and strength, channeling his sensitivity into a deeper understanding of memory and loss. And through it all, the school stood silent, its walls still whispering, its dark history etched into every brick and shadow. The teeth in the walls had not been silenced, only momentarily stilled, a chilling reminder that some horrors endure beyond time, waiting for the day they will be heard again. The end was a beginning, a fragile hope wrapped in uneasy dread. The whispers in the walls would not be forgotten.